All right. My name is Balwin and Robert, talking to a man named Robert Holden.
Hey.
I've had maybe 5, maybe 10 conversations with you. Maybe 10. I would say 10. I've known you intimately for maybe about a week and a half now. Intimate meaning like I've seen you every day because you're living with my roommate temporarily. So let me just share what my intention is right now. Yeah, so I am scared. I have a lot of fear. And fear is scary in that I don't know what exactly I'm afraid of. But I do know that it creates a lot of anxiousness in my system. I do know whenever I hear about forest fires, I freak out. I do know that like I'm scared to invest in real estate and land because I have this idea that water is like the water levels are increasing and people may have to move. So like the climate is, things are happening in a way that politicians apparently are aware of and not acting enough. And there's just so much shit about climate. And I am tired of not knowing what I'm afraid of. And I met Robert, who is this like dorky, chill scientist, who's really caring and like schooled me on like a 500-year plan of what would bring America, not just America, but the planet back in harmony with the earth, and he exposed me how many brilliant minds, like 5 different people proposed glorious solutions to climate change itself. So it's like, as dark as I'm feeling and confused, like there's also lots of scattered light in this. And so yeah, but when Robert has so much information. So my intention of these conversations is for us to witness a guy who knows nothing about climate change being trained by an expert on what it is, what's climate change, where we at, what troubles are we going to be facing, what possible solutions are there, and what are the warning signs of points of no return, and how long before legit disasters where oxygen levels are impacting the way we can even function, and how far away we are from that. So all of those topics, we're not covering all of that today. Today we're just going to get to know who Robert is, what his source of wisdom and intelligence, where it comes from, what he's done, and a little brief introduction on what is climate change, what does the earth do, what has it been doing, what does a healthy earth look like, and so we'll start off with those conversations. So with that said, Robert, please share with us who you are and why do you know so much about this stuff?
Yeah, I'm Robert. So I've been working in the climate change field for sort of 15 or so years. I trained as an ecologist at university, so I studied ecology and evolution mainly. And yeah, I've worked in academia for the last 15 years. And I'm kind of a failed PhD student, actually. I did 3 years of a 3-year PhD and quit. Yeah, for a myriad of reasons. um, and then I ended up working in climate in Sweden. I moved to the Swedish Arctic, where I've been since, well, 2010. And
I want to pause you right there because I would love to know a little bit more on what exactly you were studying as a PhD student and how that led you to living in the Arctic. Like, yeah.
yeah, and before my PhD, I did a lot of like farmland surveying, like working on land use projects, and also a lot of carbon balance work, particularly in the like mountains and moorlands of Britain. And from there, I got a PhD where the field work was in Arctic Sweden. I was actually studying the controls on tree line. So most people think of tree line as like going up a mountain, and at some point you can no longer grow trees because it gets too cold. But there's also a north-south one. So as you go further north in the northern hemisphere, it becomes too cold for trees to grow. And traditionally, in both those examples, we sort of imagine the trees getting shorter as they reach that threshold. But in some places, they don't. They go from mature trees, and there's a very sudden, sharp line, and then you have open tundra. So I was studying that one because anywhere we have a sharp boundary is a place we can have very rapid change. So I was trying to figure out what was holding that boundary, and consequently, like what the change would be that caused it to shift, because it is a place we can see there'd be a very rapid shift.
Wow. Anything? Are there some variables you suspect that you notice in that sharp spot that would be a catalyst to change?
Yeah. Yeah, I had a hunch it was related to soil moisture, because in the Arctic you have these things called freeze-thaw cycles, which are basically water expands when it freezes. So water in the soil, when the soil freezes and thaws, it actually like expands and contracts. And that has a consequence for small plants, like the expansion and contraction in the spring and the autumn in the Arctic can basically like lift out seedlings or damage their roots and kill them. So I think it was actually a control on establishment. Like you could grow a mature tree further north if it could establish, and actually it couldn't establish. That's my hunch.
Got it. Cool. But you never got to follow through with getting a PhD on that hunch because?
Gosh, this is a long story. The long and the short story is, I think I was attracted. I think we're people that do this work around our trauma and like feelings and stuff. And I think actually my like trauma was attracted to this place. Like I knew from the beginning it was going to be a shit show, and I was attracted to these supervisors who essentially treated me how I felt on the inside, which was not good. And one of them, it took them a few weeks to speak to me after I got the job. Like I was in there I was in their building and they ignored me. A couple of weeks later, they sat me down and were just like, come back when you're finished. um, and then a couple of months later, like they had like, it was just a mess. It was just a mess and something I didn't have skill to navigate. And like one of them was going through a breakdown, the other just sort of hated everything. And
I'm getting a glimpse of like how people living in these Arctic environments are isolating,
oh well,
not people. Yeah.
they just lived in Britain, like they were academics in Britain.
Oh, got it.
But I guess attracted to the Arctic. Yeah, yeah.
Got it.
Yeah, it was just a mess. And then I ended up just moving to my field site. Like for a few years, I spent half the year in Sweden, roughly like 4 to 6 months. And then I just ended up moving, staying.
So where did you go after that academic experience?
Then I worked in a small research station in the Swedish Arctic, like right in the north of Europe. And
Tell me, what was your motivation to do that, and what was life like in that world?
So originally, this was my solution to fixing my PhD. Like, it was coming to the end and needed an extension and more time. So, and I basically went to find other supervisors. I got my university to agree to an extension where I went part-time, and then I applied for this job at my field site, which was part-time, so that I could like draw out the end of my PhD and solve it. And what happened was the people at the university, when they got to the point of agreeing and they read the small print in my grant contract, and it turned out we couldn't solve the problem like this. So then I just stayed in Sweden and took a full-time job. And I've always been attracted to the Arctic. I got to like work in the mountains all year round, like in the dark of the winter and in the light of the summer, and do something I was interested in. I was running a greenhouse gas monitoring station on a permafrost mire in Sweden, which is it's just a fascinating place. It's so unlike the world the rest of us live in. Like,
Yeah, I would love like a help translating what that looks like. What did you even say? Something about gas, pharma gas. What?
So I lived in a village which had about 100 people in like on the edge of the Swedish mountains. So like we had a mountain in the village with a ski slope in it. We had 100 people living at the bottom of the mountain. And then this small research station, which had about, there were 3 jobs people had in the village. Like a third of people worked on the railroad, a third of people worked in the research station, and a third of people worked in tourism. People go there to see the northern lights, basically, and to hike and ski. And the research station also had guests, so there were like a few more people around because there's a few hotels and a research station. And then I worked 10 miles from the research station in a bog, basically, like a flat area next to a 70-mile long lake, with like the mountains in the background. And it's at the edge of the permafrost. So like in the high Arctic, the ground is just frozen all year round. And the surface thaws in the summer, but underneath it is this permafrost, permanent frozen ground.
Got it.
So we were right at the edge of this permafrost. It's like you can kind of think of it as a wedge, like further north, this is north, further
Yeah.
north it's thicker, further south it's thinner. We were right on the edge where the point was.
And at your edge, it's like right when it started to escalate the amount of permafrost underneath
Yeah,
the soil.
yeah. And actually where we were, it was patchy. So in a small scale, like in a matter of feet, you go from a spot which has permafrost where all year round there's frozen soil, and then right next to it to a wet hole, basically, where there used to be permafrost and it had melted and become a bog. And you could look at, like, over time, you could look at the landscape and you sort of see parts growing and parts thawing. And you hear stories of people that have been there longer where they're like, oh, we used to have a instrument shack like there in the middle of that wet hole, where the ground's collapsed. And even while I was there, like, we had to move our path a few times because the ground collapsed. And we have like a boardwalk and it was just always collapsing.
Right. I just want to voice what I've understood, which is the significance of permafrost and how it impacts what's possible in its growth, and like the unique environment you were studying, because you got all these different layers of permafrost, plus like people expressing the history of it. So you have these like minimal permafrost areas, and then you have parts where it escalated, and you got to just compare and learn how this permafrost impacts plant life.
And you could like, you can literally see like places where the vegetation that grows over the permafrost, it's like drier, it's a drier environment, and you could see places where that ground had collapsed and was now underwater, and the vegetation that should be growing in the dry is like underwater and dying, and like the edge is like expanding. I'm
starting to get a glimpse of why soil is so important to you, because the health of it sounds so obvious that the health of the soil is what dictates how the life that springs from it.
Yeah, and and right now it's not so bad in Scandinavia, but in like Russia, they're having these huge holes open up in the permafrost, and it's a problem for people, and it's like a symptom of the changing climate. But in Canada and Russia, like, settlements are built on the permafrost, like that's the foundation of the house. So once the permafrost melts, it collapses, and the buildings collapse and they fall in a big wet hole. And there's places in Russia where these holes have opened up that are like 100 meters across or more, and then like, I don't know, 10 or 20 meters deep with that thawing. And it's very sudden, just it starts to thaw and the ground collapses.
Wow. Got it. Let's plant a seed. Let's like bookmark a deeper conversation about permafrost, because I'm seeing how this is one whole area of the impact of global warming that's going to reshape land and the way we've been relating to it for most of these northern parts of the world. So I do want to hear your thoughts. You know, we'll also bookmark your path and your journey as an expert, and I would just like to hear like what a healthy earth looks like to you based on your perspective. And you know, if you can tell me a little bit about carbon and why that's important, and what the earth does, and kind of like the way life existed on earth until the 1800s. You know, what the levels were and what elements were at play. And and then there is like a rhythm of like freezing and thawing, I don't know, heating up. So
Yeah.
it's like I would love for you to
Yeah, I think this is a point that people who don't believe in climate change always argue about. They have this like thoughts that the climate has always been changing, so it's changing now. Why does it matter?
yeah. Yeah. And now I want to hear, like, what does climate mean to you?
Climate's the like long-term aggregate of weather. I think like weather is what's happening in the moment. Like, is it sunny? Is it rainy? Is it snowing? And climate is like the long-term what's normal. And that has shifted dramatically during the lifetime of the Earth, like dramatically. We used to not have a atmosphere. Like, there's been so many changes, but I think the key thing for me is like our ecology is the system that keeps us alive, and it requires all these parts. And the climate we've evolved in, which is over like a few 100,000 years, that's the one that we want to keep. Like, it's the one that we can live in. So these people who say like the climate's always changing, like that's to some extent true. And life is the thing that's adapted it. And we can only survive in the manner that we live now in the climate that supports us. Like, if we shift it dramatically, it may be that we can't survive. And the planet has gone through these like really slow changes where it's sort of drifted from one state to another. And then what tends to happen is there's a change which often is like a new form of life, which is then changing the atmosphere, and it creates a really slow change. And then we go into like a new normal. And in that new normal, the things that survive the change begin adapting and growing and evolving to suit that climate. So that's the one I'm concerned about. Like, we have this like normal that we evolved in, and that are like agricultural systems adapted to, that can keep this many people alive.
So what I'm understanding is throughout time, there's always like change is inevitable. There are like it takes a long couple 100,000 years, but some change eventually occurs. That's a tipping point where some life dies out and some evolve in this new change. And
right.
So a few 100,000 years ago, there was a change that created the environment where we thrived in.
Right.
So what was on Earth before, and how did like it get to that? What did it look like to be like, oh shit, humans are thriving in this new?
Yeah. Well, so the time scale is actually much longer. So it's millions of years that these changes typically take.
Millions, got it. So okay.
And there's like other parts imposed on that. So there's like there's natural cycles in the orbit of the Earth around the sun and the way the planet's tilted, and these things, they're called Milankovitch cycles. And there's actually like three or four cycles within that slightly change the climate. And then there's these other bigger things like a new form of life evolving that then changes the atmosphere. So the thing that happened for sort of creating our current climate was actually carbon getting locked up in coal, essentially, which
carbon getting locked up in coal
and oil, and a,
That's what,
a
yeah.
long-term store which cooled the climate to this stable point where we've been surviving. And then imposed on that has been the cycle of glaciation, which is more to do with the solar cycles. I think that's true. I'd actually have to check on that, but I
Okay.
think glaciation is more the solar cycles.
Great. I'm gonna have to slow you down because my brain can only handle so much. Let's bookmark solar cycles, glaciation. I can't, I don't even know what that means yet. But let's take that aside because I'm still hooked on this idea that like the something somehow carbon started storing into coal and oil, which stabilized the earth. Like what was happening before, and how did the earth do that for that process to happen? You know,
Yeah.
yeah.
So most, so there's like, I think there's three main types of coal, and they were each produced at a certain time in our planet's history. And the like, I think the first one is 300 million years ago, which was in the Carboniferous period, where just everything was very different. It was a much warmer climate. The land masses were in a different place. Like land masses drift around and pull apart and come back together. And for some reason, just the circumstances were right back then that the Earth had a lot of very low land forests, and like swampy lowland forests. And what happened in that period, like it was warm, these trees are growing, and they would fall over into the water and just sort of sink and not decompose because there's no oxygen. So these swampy forests were like growing for a few million years and just falling over and like compressing. I think it's something like the ratio of like coal to like that first compaction of soil is like 1 to 10. So like 10 feet of tree gets compressed into 1 foot of coal. Basically, that just happened for millions of years. So the trees are growing, absorbing carbon from the atmosphere, and then essentially burying it in a geological deposit, a long-term stable store. And that act of removing the carbon from the atmosphere and putting it into a stable geological store just slowly cooled the climate. So we went from this like warm period where we imagine like dinosaurs and things to this cool period that we live in. Like we live in a cooler planet, but we evolved in that cooler planet and we're adapted to it. And traditionally, these changes take millions of years.
So now I followed you on, it was a warmer planet. There was way more water, swampy, so plants fell, and eventually, like, if a tree falls now because of the oxygen, it'll decompose and like it'll just it won't turn into coal the way it did back then.
That's true, and the place it does. Well, the thing that's happening on our planet now that's similar is the formation of peat, which is
Formation of
peat, this like rich carboniferous soil. It's typically in like boggy places. Britain has a lot of it. Ireland has a lot of it, where you have very short vegetation growing in a wet area, and that just dies, and exactly the same process happens. It goes into the wet part, so it's under the water, and it just like whatever comes next sort of compresses it, and
cool.
We have these stores of carbon which haven't, they're new, so they haven't made it to coal. They may never make it to coal. It depends what happens next.
Got it. And now as this happened, why does having coal, why does having these trees that go down and then eventually turn into coal cool the planet?
Um, that's well, that's the greenhouse effect working in reverse. It's basically the opposite of current global warming. So carbon, like CO2 in the atmosphere, it basically acts as a blanket. This is how it's usually described. It's like a blanket over the earth, but I don't know, blanket's always a little bit misleading for me. It's like an oversimplification. What happens is the sun is like shining its light, it's coming into the planet, and it hits the surface where it causes heating. And heating is like a exchange from like one form of energy to another. So we're actually taking in certain wavelengths from the sun, and they're resulting in like the matter absorbing energy and like vibrating more, and that is heating. And
Yeah.
and then the effect is that they transmit out long like infrared radiation. So it's like light is converted to infrared radiation. And then that tries to like leave, and that's what the blanket holds in. So it doesn't stop it coming in because it's coming in a different form, and then
But
it
it
gets
catches it from not leaving.
yeah.
That's okay.
So the more of it we have, the thicker the blanket. So in the past, we had more carbon in the atmosphere, and it got removed into coal, oil, gas, and limestone. Like there's also a rock formation which stores it.
Got it. So by taking that blanket and putting it into the earth as coal, there's less blanket, so more of it can leak out rather than being suffocated in this extra heat.
Right. And then this happened at a few distinct periods in history where for a few million years it was being taken in and buried. And each time that happened, the climate cooled, and the climate cooled. It happened over millions of years, and slowly everything adapted to it and like changed to the new climate. Some things didn't make it, some things went extinct, some things changed. But crucially, because it was over millions of years, things had a chance to evolve, adapt, move. Like it's a very slow, like creeping change. Like if you're a tree, you can disperse your seeds like, I don't know, depending on the type of tree, like a few feet, a few 100 feet, a few 100 miles. And because the change is small, like even if you're dropping your seeds a few feet away, those trees are growing, and they can like slowly migrate north with the climate. Or actually, I guess it would be south in this case because it's cooling. Or not south, equator. They move towards the equator rather than the poles. Right now, things are warming, so ideally they'd be shifting polewards, but it's so quick. It's
Got it. We'll get to that. I actually wanna pause here, and I feel like this feels like a good session to wrap up because I feel like a beautiful picture has been painted of what the Earth's cycle has been. Yeah, and I think on the next call, I want to hear a little more of like what the Earth would have done naturally, like to balance out if too much coal came and then it got too cool. And so I think I want to continue with that to learn what the Earth does when we don't interfere with it. And then we can also start talking about like what it is humans have been doing and how that's been impacting this rhythm.
yeah. I'd like to come back to our like the recent history we evolved in. I didn't quite get there.
Yeah, that too.
That's cool.
yeah, we'll touch on that to, yeah, like where on that arc did humanity thrive, and because yeah, we started there. Cool.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. I feel smarter, and I feel like we're walking a long tunnel, but there's going to be light at the end. So I have a good relationship on knowing like what soil, what trees mean to me as a human, and for my survival and for the planet, and like, you know, I think um yeah, there's so much to take away from these talks.
Thank you.
Cool. We'll talk soon. Thank you so much.
Cool.
All right. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.